Well, good afternoon, everyone. It's so good to see you. I'm Ken Bibrai, the host of Coffee with Ken, a thought leadership series at the nexus of business and politics. And by day, I actually work in commercial real estate at Savills, a global commercial real estate firm. And wanted to kind of kick things off with you, Governor, just in a very practical way. You're a business leader, an executive who has now stepped into this amazing role in government. And I'm sure there's a bit of a transition for you as you do that. But as you think about economic development and this moment we live in, where there are nearly $1 trillion of incentives coming to companies through the Inflation Reduction Act, CHIPS Act, infrastructure bill, to manufacture in America. How do you look to set Illinois apart? How do you look to convince these companies that this is where they should be?
Look, you've got to be competitive with other states, so there's no doubt having incentives, making sure you've got a closing fund. I think those are sort of prerequisites for just being on the playing field. But the reality is that just trying to compete on that basis of tax incentives and closing fund dollars and so on isn't enough. You've got to have something else going for you. And you also have to recognize what makes your state special and why companies will want to come to your state versus some other state apart from the incentives. And so one thing I know is, we're not competing for kind of very low cost manufacturing. If you want to go hire people that are earning minimum wage, the federal minimum wage being $7.25, honestly, that's not Illinois. And also, if you're looking for low-skilled workers for a manufacturing or other kind of facility, that's not Illinois either. We've got the third largest community college system. We're the second best education system on pre-K to high school, second best education system according to CNBC and others. And we also have some of the best universities in the entire world: University of Illinois, Northwestern, University of Chicago, DePaul. I don't want to leave anybody out. We've got a lot of universities. And they really are all ranked in various different ways, either for the programs they have or just overall. Just to mention that we have literally the two best business schools in the country at University of Chicago and Northwestern. So high-skilled labor, the ability to provide every level of skill, from PhD scientists all the way down to someone who is expert at advanced manufacturing. We've got all of that and the ability to train people to do that. So having the people, having the land and the capability to provide all the utilities that you need on the land that you need, those are all things that you've got to have. And then finally, I think it's having, not to take from your title, but having the innovators in your economy that will help to boost a company when they come here and they're looking to grow after they plant themselves into the ground here. Those are things that Illinois has to offer, and those are some of the ways in which we differentiate ourselves as against, not to pick on anybody, hope you're not from the state Mississippi, for example.
So when you came into office versus today, Innovate Illinois, right? Like, what was the condition of the economic development outreach versus what it is today? I mean, I'm sure that was a bit of a journey as an executive.
It was, and I'm almost embarrassed to tell you what it was like, but I sometimes joke that I'm a master of hurdling low bars. If you lay a bar on the ground, I can step right over that. But truly, that's how it was for economic development in Illinois. It's kind of sad to say. In 2018, before I took office, when I came into office, I had been in business my entire career, helping to build businesses. I'd both been in venture capital and also an entrepreneur. And so the idea that I was going to focus on building our economic development capability, that was something I was really excited to do. Showed up and found out really we didn't have what we needed to make that happen. So I talked a little bit about incentives, of course, and having a closing fund. None of those really existed, at least to be competitive. So you needed those just kind of baseline. But then you've got to have an actual sort of, I'll call it an economic development corporation, which many states have. Or you've got to at least have an organized endeavor, an institution that when a company shows up in your state, they have a series of questions, you're able to easily answer those questions, show them what it is that they need, and then deliver on that. That was not something we had in Illinois. So that's challenging. Remember, we're the fifth largest economy among the states in the United States. We're the 18th, if we were an independent country, we'd be the 18th largest economy in the world. So that means we'd be a member of G20 if we were an independent country. So it's not like we're failing on the economic front overall, but the idea of accelerating our growth was what I was excited about. And so when I showed up in office, we didn't have that. It's now, I'm in my 6th year, just 5.5 years in. And we've moved in the right direction. We've attracted a lot of big companies, and we've got a pipeline of companies that want to come to Illinois like we've never seen before.
Yeah. So if you were an independent country, you'd be the president. I'm like, okay, I'm just curious. Yeah. So, told you. So today you signed a budget, right? Let's hear about it, right? This is your 6th balanced budget. I mean, a real testament. And, I poked through it, and I see there's nearly $500 million for quantum computing, investments in biomanufacturing. Give us some of the headlines there, and also why some of those investments are so important to make.
3,300 pages. You poked through it? Really?
The governor's chief of staff was like, Ann Caprera, she's like, if you're going to do this, you're going to read, and she quizzed me, and I read it all.
By the way, let me say that if you want to be great at innovation, which we do in Illinois, you've got to start with having great, innovative people around you who are highly capable. And my chief of staff, Ann Caprera, who you've known for quite a long time, is chief among them. I mean, she really is terrific. Yeah.
It explains how you have 6 balanced budgets in 6 years.
So I'm proud of, look, another maybe low bar was that Illinois, for 2 years before I became governor, Illinois could not pass a budget. Not a balanced budget, just any budget. And we as a result of that, I mean, things were getting funded because people had gone to court to force the state to fund things. It's the governor and the legislature couldn't get along. And so we went 2 years and 6 days without a budget. That's longer than any other state in the United States ever. And so we were left with a pile of bills that were unpaid, $17 billion of unpaid bills, all kinds of credit downgrades. We had 8 of them in a row for the state. So a lot of challenges. So when I came into office, there were literally people saying, like, you don't really want this job, because you might have to declare bankruptcy. And of course, that's not true, but people felt that way. And so when I came into office, that was something I really needed to address first and foremost. I told you about economic development, but honestly, if you're not balancing the budget and being fiscally responsible, you really can't do anything else. Yeah. So that's what we were doing. And fast forward to today, I signed our 6th balanced budget. We, by the way, have received 9 credit upgrades since I became governor. We also, I'm very proud of it. And we paid off all those overdue bills in the state. We've gotten made real progress on paying our pensions, which is something everybody's been concerned about for a lot of years. So thank you for raising it. 3,300 pages of a lot of very, very good stuff for the people of the state of Illinois, while also being fiscally responsible. And we project that we will have a small, but importantly, a real budget surplus.
Well, at the Social Innovation Summit, we're really focused on making sure the innovators from nonprofits, from education, from philanthropy, from the private sector, public sector all come together. And education and talent is always one of the top areas of discussion. So we'd love to hear some of your insights about education. We know it's a big priority for you, for Illinois. How are you thinking about upskilling, reskilling? How are you making sure to target disadvantaged communities that maybe aren't participating in a lot of the advancement that's happening? So how do you think about that as a tool?
Well, let me start with, I think, college education, university education, hugely important, but it's not for everyone, and we shouldn't be forcing everybody to go to college. A lot of people took on tons of debt to go to college to get an education that didn't actually lead to a job for them, and they're still paying their debts. And we see at the federal level, the president's trying to help people pay down their debt. Here in Illinois, we're trying to help people to stop taking on debt by making college really affordable in the state. But building up our community college system is just as important as investing in our universities. Mm-hmm. So that is where we think people, in Illinois, you can go to community college for free. And so,
that's right.
And we put really a significant amount of money into our state scholarship and grant programs. So whether you're going to community college or university, since I came into office, we had a program where you would sign up to, you'd fill out your FAFSA form. Everybody know what that is. They're having challenges with that at the federal level this year, but having said that, the FAFSA form was kind of the kickoff for, are you eligible for a state scholarship? People would line up to do that, and we would run out of money when half of the people couldn't get scholarships, right? So even though they were eligible. So now we put enough money into the programs for the last 5 years so that last year, everybody that applied for a scholarship got one, if you were eligible, if you're FAFSA eligible. So I'm very proud of the fact that we have many more people that are eligible to go to college and are going to college. And it's important to me to invest in our education system, and all the way down from higher education all the way down to starting with home visitation and early education, preschool, I think, and also quality childcare. To me, that's all education.
Yeah. And
so we've made major investments in that whole conveyor belt from cradle to career, and it's working. It really is working, but we were behind. So we've caught up, we're getting ahead. Illinois used to be the best in the country at investing in early childhood education. And that was 20 years ago. Now we've kind of fallen to middle of the pack, or at least last few, couple of years ago we had been. Now we're once again regaining leadership, and I think it's the most important thing that we can do, because all your brain development, or most of it anyway, takes place in your first 3 years, 5 years of life. You're still developing all the way to you're about 26, and then your brain's dying. I'm 59, so I've lost
nothing to worry about.
Yeah. Well, it'd be comfortable to lie down, and that'll be the end of it. But investing in education at every level, hugely important for the economic development of our state.
We live in quite polarizing times. It is obviously an election year. Would love your kind of thoughts just at a macro level on citizenship, on civics, on the state of our democracy, and how you see those play out, and maybe even tie it into kind of young people, right? If you're learning at such a young age, right, like this is a moment where you're learning about your country and democracy and civics, like what are your thoughts on
Well, everybody ought to take at least a civics class,
Yeah.
if not several, when they're in their K-12 years.
Yeah.
I think that's hugely important. I think people generally have forgotten what this country really was all about, which is, we are a collection, mostly, almost all, immigrants, right? We, at some point or another, almost all of us came from somewhere else. Some of us, our families were driven out of wherever we were. In my case, it was in Ukraine during the pogroms, when Russians were essentially driving Jews and Ukrainians out. And so they were running for their lives. There are people doing that today that, this country ought to be accepting and welcoming. But we're also, we're a country that is a conglomeration of people who believe in something collectively, and that something is democracy, and the idea that, everybody has the right to vote. It's taken us a long time to get to that point, by the way, but important that we protect that right. Civil rights and voting rights, it strikes me, are fundamental to the future of our country. And so investing in civics education, making sure that people understand the importance of democracy. I fear that, we're, not to be polarizing, but I do fear we're on the verge of losing that, because there's some portion of the population, whatever percent you want to ascribe or assign to it, some portion of the population that just doesn't see the value of democracy, because maybe they haven't felt that it's had a positive effect on them personally. But the reality is it's the thing that undergirds any success that we have as a country. And if we lose our focus on it, and we fail to educate future generations about the importance of it, we're going to lose more than just democracy in this country. And I think I'm deeply concerned about that. I want to add one thing. This is a world in which I think we need to be reminded that being kind to one another, and I say this not as a political matter, just being kind to one another, and yes, it ought to be brought into politics too, is hugely important. Just reaching out to people that may need a helping hand, somebody that you know, by the way, that might have a mental health problem, or somebody you know who you totally disagree with on things. But deep down, there's something good about that person, and if you can connect with that, I think that's ultimately what's going to bring this country back together again. We don't talk about that enough, and politicians don't talk about that enough. There's enough of, and I feel it myself. I get asked questions. Let's say somebody who disagrees with me will ask me a question that's loaded, that's intended to make me upset with what they're asking, and sometimes I'll fall into the trap of being upset about how they're asking me the question, and that's a failure sometimes on my part. But most of the time, I try to at least address it in the way that I think will bring some commonality to it. Talking about the budget today, there are, of course, people who disagree with what we did with our state budget, as there is every day. But reminding people how important education is and healthcare and standing up for the most vulnerable people in our society. Anyway, those are all things to me that will bring us back together if we can try to focus on those things and not on, talking about how terrible each other are and getting personal with one another. Politics has got too much of that today. I'm not sure when it went wrong, because I'd like to say it was just recently, but the reality is I remember, we can all remember how tough the attacks were on various politicians in years gone by. So I'm not sure how to measure it, but it doesn't feel right today. I'm 59. I've been involved in politics even as a layperson for almost all of my adult life in some way or another, and it feels different.
So the Democratic Convention is coming to Chicago this summer. That could be an interesting segue. Maybe talk a little bit about, there we go, that's exciting news. How and why was Chicago selected? But then also maybe just piggybacking on what you just said, what role do you think you play as the host for this convention to maybe amplify and highlight some of those points?
Sure. Well, Chicago was selected because it's the greatest city in the entire country.
Next question.
Love all the rest of the cities, don't get me wrong, but I also think that there's another feature, which is, look, it's a Democratic convention to renominate our current president, and we are a demonstration in many ways. If you can stand on top of the United Center where the convention will take place, and you can point to the things that Joe Biden has done to improve things, at least in our city and our state, and I think that's an important feature. Again, whether you agree or disagree with his politics, if he's choosing a city to get renominated in, choosing one where you can easily see the improvements that he's brought, like, for example, you mentioned quantum computing recently. Well, part of the reason that Chicago is becoming a leader in that is because Joe Biden's passage of the Chips and Science Act, of the IRA, and so on. By the way, bipartisan support for both of those bills has brought real investment to Chicago, where we already had some of the great scientists in quantum at University of Chicago, University of Illinois, Northwestern, and so on. So again, being able to sort of stand on top of, figuratively speaking, the United Center and point to the amazing developments. I mean, any of you who live in Chicago or have spent any time here know that, and I'll say sorry, not sorry in response to this, but if you've had slow traffic because you've seen a bunch of orange cones in the road, and that's keeping you from getting where you want to be, sorry, but not sorry, because we've invested billions of dollars, and we continue to. In part, it's because of Joe Biden. In part, it's because we passed an infrastructure bill before the federal government got around to it, and we were shovel ready, so to speak, as a result when they did pass their bill. So a lot of improvements here. I think Chicago was chosen in part for that, and in part because we live up to the values. I mean, the Democratic Party has a set of values about standing up for people's personal freedoms, about individual rights, and thinking about whether it's women's rights and reproduction, the focus on allowing people to live the life they live, love who they love, a common belief in people's ability to pursue whether it's workers' rights or civil rights. Those are things that are all protected here in Chicago and in Illinois. And so I think, again, it's a perfect demonstration of the values, I think, broadly of the Democratic Party.
And you've been to a lot of conventions, right?
Been to, I think, every convention since I was able to vote.
Interesting.
And I was a volunteer, or I was invited by somebody, or whatever.
Have you spoken at a convention?
I ended up, no.
No?
I have never spoken at a convention before, but I've never been governor of a state before at a Democratic convention. So I guess that's not true. Well, we did mostly have an online convention in 2020. But anyway, I think what's exciting, we're going to have really a terrific Democratic convention here, and we have 77 neighborhoods of the city of Chicago, and we've involved all of them in our convention. So I think that's the other thing we'll be able to show off is the diversity of the Democratic Party to the nation. So
okay, very cool. That's amazing. So we have this amazing and I think really unique audience that has been put together by the Social Innovation Summit, and over 2 days, countless panels, discussions, 1,000 people. Everyone's going to kind of go back home, whether they live in Illinois or beyond. What's the message you want them to take back, whether it's to their nonprofit, to their community, to their business, to their colleagues, to their community? What do you want them to take away from this summit, this time with you, and just having been in Illinois during this time?
So I used to live, my life in the private sector. And my view of social innovation is different now that I'm in government. We need you more than ever. I mean, if the private sector needs you, the public sector needs you even more. Innovation broadly is hard to infuse. I took over the government of the state of Illinois. We had computer systems that were, decade or two old sometimes, green screens that people were still using. When I came into office, we just a lot of processes that needed improving. And also, very importantly, how do we solve for some of the major challenges that government should be involved in, but is a little slower than innovators are, a lot slower really. And we need you all, and many of you who are engaged in particularly nonprofits and for-profit companies that can solve some of these problems. We need you more than ever. And so, but it's hard. I have to say, it's really hard. I mentioned it earlier, but as governor, bringing innovators around me to get things done, there's no way that I can possibly, I've got 26 major departments of the state of Illinois. You need entrepreneurial people running those departments and working in those departments. And then, importantly, they need to connect with the social innovators outside of government to help figure out what are the new things that we ought to be doing, and how can we solve a problem that we've never been able to solve before. So I think I know a lot of you are here to make the private sector private sector and private philanthropic and nonprofit connections, right? All three of those. Government needs you more than anything. And so I invite all of you and any of you who have thoughts about how you can resolve some of the challenges that we have the same problems that many other governments have. And government moves at about, I don't want to be too harsh, but at about half the pace or more, or less, I should say, of the private sector. And you all are moving at a pace that entrepreneurs move at. So we need you to pull us along. And I think, at least in Illinois, we're willing to reach out to you if you're willing to accept us and help us make real change.
So just to close, actually, after such a long career in business, have you been surprised by the actual impact you can make in government? I'm just curious, after...
I'm not surprised. Let me tell you, for 20 years before I became governor, I've been involved in early childhood development, early childhood education, as not as part of my business, just what I was doing, in the rest of my time. And I used to go work with or lobby or talk to legislators and governors all over the country in red states more than blue states because they needed it more. And and I was able to convince many of them to engage in, investing in early childhood development. It had not been top of the heap for them of things that they were doing, but when you put it almost in business terms, right, the kinds of investments and the return that you can get on investment in early childhood development, they began to understand that. So I've been on the other side, is what I'm trying to say. Then I came into government. And as I was coming into government, I thought, oh, this is great, right? Now I can do all the stuff that I wanted the other governors to do, that I was begging them to do. Now I can do it myself. And of course, I showed up, and at least in Illinois, the cupboards were bare. You couldn't find the investment dollars to make and the kinds of things that were important. So that, I think, the recognition anyway, I can make major change, and we did in Illinois. And I said to my staff as I was running for re-election, we had to deal with all the fiscal challenges, and of course we had COVID. And I said to somebody, I haven't had a year that hasn't had a major crisis in it, or the entire time I've been in government, because of, first we had a fiscal crisis in 2019, we headed into COVID in 2020. That was 2 years long. We've had the crisis of a Texas governor sending us busloads of people who would prefer not to be in 0-degree weather in January, but they're, being sent to Chicago. And we had to step up and act in a humanitarian way. And so I say all that, but as I was running for re-election, I said to my staff, if we win, the number one most important thing that I need to do in my second term is make sure that we're making the substantial investments that we haven't been able to make in the past in early childhood development. So I put forward a plan last year called Smart Start Illinois, which is really investing in everything from birth to 5 years old until kids go to kindergarten, and major investments, hundreds of millions of dollars in quality child care and early intervention services, home visiting, and preschool. And we're doing that. And so being able to, the answer to your question is, you can make such a difference. It's why I love the job that I have. Because every day I can wake up and actually do something that lifts people up or protects them in some fashion from something bad that might happen. And the ability to do that is so exciting. It's different than being in the private sector, for sure, although you can be missionary about the private sector too. But I have to say it's pretty exciting if you can, think about the millions of kids that will benefit from our major investments in early childhood development that I'm making just in these bunch of years that I'm governor.
I get up and have coffee every morning, but the governor of Illinois, ladies and gentlemen, J.B. Pritzker.
Thank you.